Chapter She. Principal and Prison. Salt Lake Telegram. Salt Lake City, Utah, Tuesday evening, March 7, 1944. Polygamy probe nabs 46. Federal jury indicts 20 in 3 states. Utah charges 34 with conspiracy. March 7, 1944, I was sleeping in Apt. Number 2 upstairs, when at 6:45 a.m., an hour before daylight, I was awakened by loud shouting and commotion in my room. I sat up in bed while being shaken and was told to get out of bed. "THIS is the FBI. I said "WHAT, do you want?" Someone said, "You are under arrest." I asked "WHERE, is your warrant?" The spokesman said "WE, don't need any." I said "HOW, do I know who you are?" I was handed an FBI badge and commanded to get up. In the meantime I sat on the edge of the bed and was handcuffed. I put on my pants while handcuffed and was told to get into the other room. The first thing they did was to search my person. My wallet contained $137. They asked me how I had so much money. I did not answer them. They joked and talked much among themselves about the money, such as "HOW, can a man with so many wives have so much money, etc." I asked to see a search warrant and asked them what they were searching for, and I was told "WE, don't need any search warrant." I said "I am an American citizen and I know my rights." Newman remarked "WE, don't care anything about that." They took me to the SL County Jail that was then located between 4th and 5th So. on 2nd East Street in the center of the block east of the SLC and County BLDG. I arrived at the jail at exactly 11:35 a.m. They took me upstairs to the 4th floor, and in a large dormitory, after the door had been unlocked, I saw the Apostles John Y. Barlow, Jos. W. Musser, Dr. Legrand Woolley, Louis A. Kelsch, and many others, perhaps 25 or 30 people. I was the last one of the called polygamist renegades to arrive at the jailhouse. Louis Kelsch said "WELCOME, Fred, we were wondering when you would arrive." I said "I had to wait for an exploratory search of my home, and it took time," and Louis said "ALL of us had the Journal of Heber C. Cleveland, Vol. 3, see pages 371 to 381. Thus began another effort by state and federal officers to put an end to plural marriages. In the March raid of 1944, federal FBI agents, U.S. deputy marshals, deputy sheriffs and city policemen all swooped down in a sudden raid to arrest 46 men and women for federal and state conspiracy acts, the Mann and Lindbergh kidnapping acts. FBI agents proceeded to search the homes and premises of the defendants to confiscate documents, books, letters and other private papers which they thought might be used against them. All this was done without search warrants. The defendants were placed behind bars of the county jail. Later they were taken handcuffed through the streets into federal court and placed under heavy bonds. While they were in prison, 15 of them were rearrested on charges of unlawful cohabitation, and 34 were arrested for conspiracy to promote unlawful cohabitation. Truth magazine was also adjudged a conspiracy for obscene, lewd and lascivious publishing. On May 25, 1944, 15 members of the fundamentalists were brought into court. Before the imposition of sentence was given by Judge Ray Van Cott Jr., the following address was presented to the court by Claude T. Barnes, chief counsel for the defendants. As an officer of this court, I am indignant at the suggestion that perhaps we are all dupes, and that the statute under which these men were convicted is but the instrumentality of vengeance of one religious sect upon another. No church, not even the dominant one that wins the respect of my heart, has a right to a special statute in its behalf. Nevertheless, let us consider the facts that arouse my displeasure. From the beginning of Utah's statehood, unlawful cohabitation was a misdemeanor punishable by a maximum fine of $300 and 6 months in the county jail. Indeed, two of the finest men, both presidents of what we have designated as the dominant church, one of whom is now living, paid fines for it as follows. September 9, 1899, $100, and 1905, $300. In 10 minutes I could, if necessary, bring those records before you. But in 1935 someone prevailed upon the Utah legislature to make unlawful cohabitation a felony punishable by a maximum sentence of 5 years. An anomalous situation, that adultery, a grievous offense against one's spouse, is a lesser crime than unlawful cohabitation, which is an offense against no one, except that it is prohibited. If this be a fight of sect against sect, I am indignant that it should seek to prostitute the judiciary and the bar. Strong men uphold the independence and fairness of justice. There is another egregious unfairness about this matter. I have in my hand the record of 886 cases of sexual offenses, a large portion of them adultery, by respected citizens of Salt Lake City during the year 1943. I have 15 pages here of names, dates, arresting numbers and other data, but did you or I ever hear of a single one of them? No, and rather than break the hearts of hundreds of are they to be immolated? We know that because of their belief men were once mangled by dogs in the Colosseum at Rome, tied to posts and made living torches along the Via Appia, or covered with sulphurous pitch, crucified and burned on the colonnades of St. Peter's, which was then the Garden of Nero. Have we reached that state of religious persecution? Have we reached the stage when 886 citizens are released with fines of from $5 to $50, and these men with a lesser offense are to go to the state prison for 5 years? The people of this state do not want these men to serve time behind bars. There is another way. Your Honor has under the 1943 law the discretion of suspended sentence and probation when it is compatible with the public interest. It is compatible with the public interest. This I know. The wrath of the bar will be aroused if it feels that its judiciary is in the slightest degree persuaded to be the instrumentality of religious vengeance. On June 7 the Hon. Judge T. Blake Kennedy pronounced sentences on 8 men and 1 woman. Prison terms of from 1 year and a day to Mrs. Edna Christensen Zitting to the long term of 4 years to Heber Cleveland was set. Others received from 2 to 3 year terms. By September the U.S. government suit against 12 fundamentalists for conspiracy was abandoned. The state conspiracy case moved forward for trial. Edna C. Zitting was convicted of kidnapping under the Lindbergh Act. Her crime was accompanying a girl across the border for which she drew a year and a day. She was helping the girl to get a legal status for her child. A few days later in the same court a man was convicted of murdering another man in a drunken brawl and was sentenced a year in the county jail. One assisted in bringing life into the world while the other destroyed life. The lady was adjudged as the greater criminal. Back in December of 1943, John Zenz was convicted of a Mann Act charge in federal court. He had taken 2 wives from Utah to Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was employed. Zenz was given 5 years in a federal prison, and his legal wife was sentenced to a reformatory in West Virginia for 2 years. On the same day, in the same court, a man pled guilty to transporting a woman across state lines for immoral purposes. He received 2 years. One case involved a hard-working man raising a family, bringing life into the world, and was given 5 years. The other man, a confessed lawbreaker, engaged in an occupation of debauching and destroying womanhood, drew only a sentence of 2 years. By now the whole nation had become aware of the arrests of these fundamentalists. Numerous articles in newspapers and magazines around the country carried the story of their arrests and convictions. These men were involuntarily giving testimony to the nation of their faith and beliefs. No amount of missionary work could have equaled the publicity and comment that had been aroused. In May of 1944, the court found the fundamentalists guilty of unlawful cohabitation with indeterminate sentences of 1 to 5 years in the state penitentiary. Salt Lake Telegram. Salt Lake City, Utah, Saturday evening, May 20, 1944. Utah judge convicts 15 of polygamy. Utah judge finds 15 guilty of polygamy. The case was appealed, and it wasn't until a year later, after the U.S. Supreme Court upheld the verdict of the lower courts, that these 15 men were imprisoned as the price they had to pay for their religious convictions. They were initially sent to the old state penitentiary on 21st South in Salt Lake City, pictured below. Later some of the prisoners were sent to the new state prison at the point of the mountain near Draper. Many church leaders were pleased to see the polygamists sent to prison. President Heber J. Grant had once written a letter to Joseph Musser saying, I shall rejoice when the government officials put a few of these best blood, as you call them, in the county jail or the state penitentiary. President Grant, however, rejoiced for only one day because he died the day after these fundamentalists went to prison. Like many ancient prophets and apostles, these soldiers of Christ were sent to prison for their testimony. Rather than give up that sacred principle, these men suffered the consequences of an unjust law. Apostle George Buchanan, who had once gone to prison, said, "The Latter-day Saints can avoid going to prison, they reject their wives. Women especially, however much they may dislike patriarchal marriage, must admire men who are so true to their wives and children, that, rather than discard them, they will go to prison. All honorable people will be impressed by such devotion and courage. It will have more weight than any amount of preaching or writing upon the subject." Juvenile Instructor 20:197. 15 faithful men honorably went to prison defending the doctrine of plural marriage as revealed to Joseph Smith. Newspapers throughout the United States and even foreign countries featured articles on these men and the principles they believed in. Men going to prison for living the ancient law of Abraham was a testimony to the world that the gospel restored in its fullness was still alive in America. A few months earlier, Truth magazine also printed an editorial stating, "With regard to compromising a single principle of the gospel, if we as a people were to be guilty of such an act of moral cowardice, we would prove ourselves unworthy the name we bore, and we could not escape the very opposition we would fain avoid." Truth, June, 1945, Vol. 2, Number 1. Then after these men served nearly 6 months in prison, a strange thing happened. 10 of these 15 men would once more make the newspaper headlines. The Deseret News. Salt Lake City, Utah, Saturday evening, October 20th, 1945. 10 cultists in promise to drop polygamy teaching. 10 members of a polygamist cult today asked the State Board of Pardons to terminate their indeterminate sentences and presented to the board, meeting at the state prison, a declaration of policy in which they promised to refrain in the future from the practice and teaching of polygamy and plural marriages. It was understood that 5 other members of the cult serving similar sentences, which were not to exceed 5 years, and which resulted from their conviction on charges of unlawful cohabitation, refused to sign the policy declaration. The policy statement was signed by cult members as follows: John Y. Barlow, Joseph White Musser, A. Timpson, Edmund F. Barlow, Oswald Brainich, I. W. Barlow, Albert E. Barlow, Dr. R. C. Ald, Joseph Lyman Jessup and David B. Darger. The other 5 who are serving terms in the state prison are Morris Quincy Kunz, Arnold Boss, Heber Kimball Cleveland, Louis Alma Kelch and Charles Frederick Zitting. A notarized declaration of policy by these 10 men was presented to the Utah State Board of Pardons at their regular monthly meeting. The statement was given to Governor Herbert B. Moore, chairman of the board, and the other board members, by Frank Jensen, publisher of the Utah Searchlight. Jensen's letter to the governor follows. October 15th, 1945. Governor Herbert B. Moore. State Capitol. Salt Lake City, 1, Utah. Dear Governor, enclosed is a copy of the little manifesto which I have prepared and which has been signed by the persons indicated and duly notarized. I will present it at the board meeting. I talked to Attorney General Giles, and he expressed the opinion that you might find it desirable to make these cases a special order of business to keep them segregated from the remaining cases coming up before the board. I hope this suggestion meets with your approval. Sincerely yours, Frank L. Jensen. Other local newspapers carried the news of the 10 men who were seeking for a means to be released from prison. Salt Lake Telegram. Tuesday, Oct. 30, 1945. Cultists to explain pledges to desist. 10 men, alleged members of a polygamist cult, who are seeking pardons from Utah State Prison, where they are serving indeterminate terms up to 5 years, Tuesday were scheduled to explain further the meaning of written pledges, given the State Board of Pardon. The pledges state the signers agree to refrain from advancing, teaching or countenancing plural marriage or polygamy, in violation of state and federal laws. Members of the Board of Pardons agreed to meet late Tuesday at State Prison to hear oral pleas of the following: Roland C. Ald, E. Anthus W. Barlow, Albert E. Barlow, David B. Drager, Joseph L. Jessup, Edmund F. Barlow, John Y. Barlow, Joseph W. Musser, Alma A. Timpson and Oswald Brainich. The petitioners, who were convicted in District Court of Salt Lake County, have each served 5.5 months. The Deseret News. October 30th, 1945. Cultists meet pardon board. 10 members of a polygamous cult appeared before the State Board of Pardons in special session at the state prison today to explain further their recently adopted declaration of policy, in which they agreed to refrain from the practice and teachings of plural marriage in the future. The members adopted the policy statement and submitted it to the board at the last regular meeting on October 20th, at which time they applied for termination of their indeterminate sentence of not to exceed 5 years, which were imposed following convictions on charges of unlawful cohabitation. Those seeking freedom from the prison and who signed the policy declaration are John Y. Barlow, Joseph White Musser, A. A. Timpson, Edmund F. Barlow, Oswald Brainich, I. W. Barlow, Albert E. Barlow, Dr. R. C. Ald, Joseph Lyman Jessup, and David B. Darger. The policy statement said in part that we individually and severally pledge ourselves to refrain hereafter from advocation, teaching or countenancing the practice of plural marriage of polygamy, in violation of state and federal laws. The statement came as a surprise to the Board of Pardons. It was an appeal for a release from prison on the condition of abandoning the practice and teaching of plural marriage. The board, which studied the printed pledge at a meeting at the state capitol last Tuesday, indicated that the promise was satisfactory as far as stated, but was in doubt whether the cultists understood what they had signed. The fundamentalists in their pledge agreed to refrain from advancing, teaching or countenancing plural marriage or polygamy, in violation of state and federal laws. Salt Lake Tribune, Tuesday, October 30th, 1945. The pledge was also printed in the newspapers. However, this statement of compromise was a gradual development of 3 different pledges that had been drawn up and printed by Joseph W. Musser and John Y. Barlow. The first statement had only the approval of Musser and Barlow. The 2 leaders had felt inspired that this document was from the Lord and that it would be the means of their liberation from prison. It was sent to a printer, and 15 lines were added for the signatures of all 15 men. However, after it was printed, none of the other 13 men would accept the terms and conditions of the document. All 13 considered it to be a restriction of their rights and a repudiation of their faith. No one signed it. After this failure, another document was drawn up, but only 5 or 6 signed. Then a third was printed, which was signed by 10 of the prisoners. Copies of these 3 documents are as follows. Declaration of Policy. To whom it may concern. We, the undersigned, members of the so-called fundamentalist religious group, desiring to live as good citizens of the state, do hereby declare as follows. That if granted a parole from our present prison confinement, we will endeavor to faithfully and truly conduct ourselves as law-abiding citizens. That since our arrest and conviction we have not, nor is it our intention in the future to encourage, by teaching or otherwise, further polygamous marriages, or to engage in them ourselves, contrary to the constitutional laws of the state of Utah or of the United States. Dated at Salt Lake City, Utah, this day of 1945. Subscribed and sworn by me the day and year above written. Notary Public. This first declaration was presented to some of the prisoners on August 27, 1945, at the Utah State Prison. Only 2 men agreed to sign it. Declaration of Policy. To whom it may concern. The undersigned officers and members of the so-called fundamentalist religious group, desiring to bring about peace and harmony within the church, and recognizing the futility of disobeying the laws of the land, even in the practice of religious belief, do hereby declare as follows. That we individually and severally pledge ourselves to refrain hereafter from advocating, teaching, or countenancing the practice of plural marriage or polygamy, in violation of the laws of the state of Utah and of the United States. The undersigned officers of the religious group above referred to further pledge ourselves to refrain from engaging in or from solemnizing plural marriages from and after this date. Dated at Salt Lake City, Utah, this day of 1945. A few days after the first declaration failed, this second document was presented to the men. One man's journal states that 6 were willing to sign it. Declaration of Policy. To whom it may concern. The undersigned officers and members of the so-called fundamentalist religious group do hereby declare as follows. that we individually and severally pledge ourselves to refrain hereafter from advocating, teaching, or countenancing the practice of plural marriage or polygamy, in violation of the laws of the state of Utah and of the United States. The undersigned officers of the religious group above referred to further pledge ourselves to refrain from solemnizing plural marriages from and after this date, contrary to the laws of the land. John Y. Barlow, Joseph Lyman Jessup. 1. W. Musser, David B. Darger. 2. A. Timpson, Edmund F. Barlow. Oswald Brainich. 1. W. Barlow. Albert E. Barlow. Dr. R. C. Ald. Dated at Salt Lake City, Utah, this 24th day of September, 1945. Subscribed and sworn by me the day and year above written. Notary Public. 10 men signed this final statement in the order that they appear above. This copy is now on record at the Utah State Capitol. District Attorney Brian E. Roberts protested against the release of the fundamentalists before they had served the 5-year maximum sentence. He questioned the sincerity of the prisoner's pledge. Roberts said the polygamous practice could be rubbed out only by keeping the applicants in the state prison, and even this might not be enough, he said in his letter, but at least it will be a step in the right direction. This incident brings up another very interesting fact worthy of consideration. Men are not always composed of the same metal as their fathers, nor do sons always follow in the footsteps of their fathers. Many a child becomes a prodigal, while his brother remains faithful. Many peculiar incidents have occurred in regard to the doctrine of plural marriage, which show division in the home over this principle. Many cases indicate that children of polygamists become opponents and persecutors of that practice. On the other hand, some children of those who oppose that principle become believers and enter into that law. It is interesting to note that Brian E. Roberts was the son of Brian H. Roberts, who valiantly defended and lived the doctrine of plural marriage, even paying the price of loss of his membership in Congress, and also served time in prison. Except for the factor of time, B. E. Roberts could have prosecuted his own father and sent him to prison. B. H. Roberts' defense of plural marriage before Congress is worthy to be read by every Latter-day Saint. See Roberts' defense before Congress, Pioneer Press. 1. H. Roberts' son, B. E. Roberts, was now making attacks from his political office to destroy the principle that side him. His letter to the Board of Pardons is as follows. Office of the District Attorney. 3rd Judicial District. State of Utah. Brian E. Roberts, November 26, 1945, 910 Boston Boulevard. District Attorney, Salt Lake City, Utah. 1. D. Lowry. Deputy District Attorney. Board of Pardons. State Capitol Building. Salt Lake City, Utah. In re. Joseph White Musser and others. Gentlemen, I am taking the liberty of writing a single letter in reference to the 10 persons who are doing terms in the Utah State Prison for unlawful cohabitation and who are applying for parole. It is the recommendation of this office that said persons, and each of them, remain in the state prison for the maximum term as provided by law. The individuals who are convicted of these crimes were members of a cult that advocates the practice of polygamy. The meetings of that cult are still being held at the same address at which they were held when these individuals were at large. The persons now in prison are considered by the authorities to be the leaders. If this cult is to be stamped out, it is our considered judgment that these leaders must be kept in confinement. Even this might not be enough, but at least it will be a step in the right direction. I have noticed in the press that some of these persons have now stated they will not advocate polygamy or practice it. I question the good faith of this statement. These people have practiced polygamy for years knowing that it was against the law. However, now, for their own convenience and advantage, they are willing to make this promise. No security is given that the promise will be kept. Their past conduct convinces me that this promise will not be kept. These people will return to their families and cult, and it will again be necessary for the law enforcement agencies to build a case against them. This will take a great deal of time and a great deal of money. I submit that to permit these people to get out at this time would make law enforcement a joke in this community. Respectfully submitted. Burr/TV. Brian E. Roberts. The men who signed the pledge were to be released from prison on December 15, 1945. The Salt Lake Tribune said. boss, Kunz, Kelschen-Zitting purportedly told their fellow cultists that they would not sign the pledge, but it was believed by inmates that when the 11 others won release dates, that some of the quartet would capitulate and apply at the December meeting. Friday, November 30, 1945. Truth magazine also published the declaration in its columns after the men were released from prison. The editor wrote, "We publish the above declaration of policy as it was signed and presented to the Utah State Board of Pardons, that our readers may be fully informed in the premises. The statement binds the signers to hereafter refrain from teaching the practice of plural marriage or polygamy, entering into the principle themselves, or solemnizing such marriages, contrary to the laws of the land. It is the sincere intention of the parties involved to adjust and conform their lives and marital conduct to both the letter and spirit of this pledge. The signers wish it clearly understood that they bear no animosity towards the state law enforcing officials." The Board of Pardons, after careful consideration, granted parole privileges to the 10 signers, also to Defendant Heber K. Cleveland, who afterwards subscribed orally to the conditions. The parole was effective December 15, after 7 months of prison confinement. 4 remaining defendants, for reasons of their own, did not petition the board for parole. Truth, January 1946, Vol. 11:218-19. The agreements made in the declaration were attempted. A notice appeared in Truth magazine which stated, "Notice. The regular meetings that have been held at 2157 Lincoln Street, Salt Lake City, by the so-called fundamentalists, will hereafter be discontinued. This is also true of the Sabbath schools. It is suggested that in wards where our children may not be welcome, Sunday school classes and exercises be held in the various homes." Truth, January 1946, Vol. 11:227. The controversial and debatable issue over signing this declaration of policy had become a mammoth and knotty problem for those who were involved, also for those who read about it, and especially confusing for anyone interested in the details of its history. All of these men went to prison in the best of spirits, but the signing of that declaration and the refusal to sign it became a most significant barrier between them. Whatever love and unity these men had as they entered the prison, it was all lost by that declaration. They had a solemn agreement as they entered prison that they would endure in patience or even die, if necessary. Going to prison brought a unity of feelings and spirit. All were in harmony and glad to pay that price to serve the Lord. That unity continued until that declaration was drawn up for signing. After it was signed, the ill feelings of antagonism and a separation of individuals and of the group was the result. Each man acted upon his own convictions, and justified to himself that what he did was what he should have done regardless of what the others chose to do. As Joseph Musser stated, each acted for reasons of their own. One of the main reasons for signing the declaration was because of the fear of losing some of their families. This proved to be inaccurate because some of those who refused to sign did not lose their families. Furthermore, some of those who did sign it lost some of their families afterwards. Some of the men declared that losing a family was not as important as signing and publishing a statement against a principle of their religion. But those who refused to sign the declaration took consolation that if they did lose some of their family, the Lord would bless them by making up the loss. They quoted the scriptures which said, "And Jesus answered and said, Verily I say unto you, there is no man that hath left house, or brethren, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands, for my sake, and the gospel's but he shall receive 100-fold. Mark 10:29-30, see also Luke 18:28-30. Another reason given for signing the compromise was so they could preach the gospel again. After putting their signatures to a document that stated they would refrain hereafter from advocating, teaching, or countenancing the practice of plural marriage, that somewhat limits the amount of teaching and preaching they could do. A much greater sermon could have been preached to the world had these men remained united in their stand on this principle. What a story of valiancy would have appeared in the newspapers and magazines if the headlines would have read, 15 men stand united and refuse to compromise their faith in plural marriage. Example is the most effective teacher. The 4 men who refused to sign or agree to the conditions of that official declaration stood their ground on 3 major principles. 1. It was wrong to sign a statement against the principles of their religious convictions. 2. It was wrong to publish such a declaration against the belief and practice of the gospel. 3. It was wrong for them to break such a pledge once it was signed, witnessed and published. The 4 men who refused to sign or agree to the conditions of that declaration also made the news for their convictions. Salt Lake Telegram. Friday, Nov. 30, 1945. 4 cultists refused to sign pledge. Refusing to alter their stand, 4 fundamentalists, Arnold Bess, Maurice Q. Kunz, Louis A. Kelch and Charles F. Sitting, who did not sign the pledge not to advocate or practice plural marriages, were due to remain in Utah State Prison, while 11 others who signed the pledge will be paroled December 11. They were convinced that if God wanted them liberated from prison, he would not choose this method of accomplishing it. They argued that God does not have to require men to abandon his laws to be liberated. They said that signing an oath not to live plural marriage was a weak excuse to live it, that such a deed is hypocrisy. One of the most serious problems that face those who sign a statement contrary to their convictions is that it continually comes back for justification. A great many people became troubled over the official declaration of 1890, and it is still an issue that requires clarification and a great deal of study to understand. Some argue that the Manifesto of 1890 was wrong, but a similar position in 1945 was justifiable. Others contend that the official declaration of 1890 and the official declaration of 1945 are the same, that both of them are manifestos, both were compromises with the Gentiles. It has been stated that the Manifesto of 1890 was not the same as the 1945 Prison Statement or Manifesto, but there are similarities that cannot be overlooked. 1. Both were signed on September 24, just 55 years apart to the very day. 2. Both began as a "to whom it may concern" unlike the revelations of the Lord contained in the Doctrine and Covenants. 3. Both were self-created and not made by enemies. Both were signed by leaders as a political expedience to obtain favors from the government. 4. Not everyone under their leadership agreed to the documents as inspired of the Lord. 5. Both are disclaimed as a revelation, but based upon the will of the Lord and having been written by feeling impressed. 6. Both agree to submit to the laws of the land. 7. Both speak of their intent to conform to monogamy marriage laws. 8. Both agree not to solemnize any more plural marriages. 9. The leaders after 1890 and 1945 did not keep the pledge, but continued to live and teach the doctrine of plural marriage. 10. Woodruff said, "We are not teaching polygamy or plural marriage, nor permitting any person to enter into its practice." Musser wrote they would refrain hereafter from advocating, teaching, or countenancing the practice of plural marriage or polygamy. An argument is entertained as to what effect the manifesto had to do with priesthood keys of seniority. Truth magazine says, in setting the 5 men apart and ordaining them to the priesthood presidency of 7, John W. Woolley was first given that high calling, coming next to Wilford Woodruff in order of ordination, so that the keys to priesthood passed in natural order from Wilford Woodruff to John W. Woolley. Truth 9:75. Forfeiting seniority and keys was done in the following manner. Those who agreed to the manifesto automatically forfeited their former seniority, as upon previous occasions others had done, and those chosen by President Taylor at Centerville became senior and the lawful administrators of the fullness of the ordinances, holding the keys to bind or loose on earth and in heaven. Truth 9:251. Now then, if Woodruff lost keys of his priesthood seniority by agreement or signature to the manifesto of 1890, then would priesthood seniority keys be conceded by a signed statement or manifesto in 1945? Both declarations agreed to submit to the laws of the land in regard to plural marriage. But the official declaration of 1945 was much the worse, for it was an agreement to refrain from even countenancing the practice of plural marriage. Joseph Smith is claimed to have told John H. Burt in a dream that Father cannot bring to pass the things that are shortly to transpire with men in power. WHO have openly or secretly, directly or indirectly, raised their hands against plural marriage. Book of Remembrance, J. W. Musser, page 17. These arguments have been presented against any compromise, concession, or statement against the doctrine of plural marriage. It is a very treacherous ground for anyone to tread upon. Convictions must be certain. Some of these 15 men claim to have had a personal revelation concerning this declaration. However, their testimonies are very contradictory. One man had a dream showing him that signing that document was wrong. The next morning he told his cellmate of this dream, and with tears in his eyes, he declared that he would remove his name from that list. But he never did. Another signed it, then prayed to know if he did the right thing. He had a dream showing him that by signing that document he had cowardly left the battlefield and would never be able to get back. He was told that without the fight he could not gain the victory. One person bore a testimony of a vision in which he went to see John Taylor, who advised him to follow Joseph Musser. He then signed it. Still another man had an angel appear to him instructing him that it was a wicked document. The heavenly messenger said that it was so bad that if everyone signed or agreed to it, God would cast them all off. Another individual wanted a witness and asked the Lord to send his servant to instruct him what to do. Joseph Musser came to him and recommended his signing the document, which he then did. One prisoner signed it against his conscience because he was persuaded by his father to do it. He was impressed by the spirit that it was wrong, but he finally conceded and signed it anyway, but later regretted it. One of the men who helped to create the document had a dream later indicating that it was not of God. Thus, so many contradictory testimonies over signing this document become so confusing that men must determine for themselves whose testimony was of the Lord. No other doctrine in this dispensation has endured so many controversial and conflicting encounters as the plural marriage issue. The conflict from its beginning to the present has encompassed churches, groups, state and federal officials in a maze of inconsistencies. Wilford Woodruff justified his manifesto of 1890 by saying it was given by way of revelation. Some of the men who signed the Little Manifesto of 1945 said they also did it by revelation. Some people are convinced by revelation that both of these documents are not of God. Thus the contentions and confusion persist. Some have said that if the Lord had sent that declaration by revelation and only 2 men agreed to it, then it should not have been revised and revised again to obtain more signatures. They contend that the first document was the most sufferable because the word parole was included. The 2 other forms agreed to suspend the practice or teaching of plural marriage hereafter and from and after this date, which is much longer than the terms of a parole. We know the prophet Joseph Smith petitioned the Lord 3 times to give the Book of Mormon manuscript to Martin Harris. On his 3rd supplication, the Lord gave his permission to the direful consequences which followed. We do not know how many times John Y. Barlow and Joseph Musser prayed concerning this document. We do know that it was the 3rd revision that was signed and used. The Lord has also warned the saints that if ye ask anything that is not expedient for you, it shall turn unto your condemnation. D&C 88:65. Men bearing the priesthood still support or oppose these 2 declarations. Hence, the necessity for each man to learn which course is the most pleasing to the Lord and to determine for himself what he would do in similar circumstances. One man, Albert Barlow, had the rare but priceless experience of standing on both sides of this dispute. Albert Barlow. No way am I going to sign anything. I'll take my medicine and I'll die in the damn joint before I'll sign anything. Albert Barlow is the son of I.W. Barlow. He was born and raised in the principle of plural marriage and had been taught to honor this sacred law. He was very familiar with the blessings and trials of a large plural family and had gained a firm conviction of its truthfulness. When Albert was arrested, he went to prison with his father and the other 13 polygamists. Bert's story and testimony is perhaps the most unique of any of the men who went to prison, as he experienced both sides of this manifesto controversy and felt the effects of both the remorse and pride of signing and not signing that declaration. Here in his own words is his story. It was on May 15, 1945, when we were incarcerated at the old prison, which was part of the old Federal Territorial Prison at Sugar House. After being there about 3 months, I was sent out to the new prison site at the point of the mountain. I was considered a minimum security. At the new site we were imprisoned in army barracks, which had been moved there and remodeled into prison barracks, inside of a 12-feet-high chain-link fence. There were no guards on the towers or anywhere around except for 1 guard at night. 2 of the brethren were sent out several days before this. While we were there, I don't remember how many weeks it was, the warden came out with a paper for us to sign. It was just before a 6 months hearing. At that time they used to have a hearing after you had been in prison 6 months. They were trying to do something to get out on that 6 months hearing when they met with the parole board. The warden came out with this paper, and it said in there that we would not practice plural marriage, we'd live according to state laws, and that we would not even countenance the practice of plural marriage. All three of us knelt with our hands on each other's shoulders, in the circle of prayer, and prayed about signing it. All three of us came up with a positive spirit, not to sign it-that it was from the devil. In about another week, another one came out, similar to this one. Some of the extreme parts of it were omitted. We prayed about that, and all three of us came up with the same answer again, that it was from the devil. In the meantime, before the third one came out, my father and another brother were sent out, making 5 of us there, of the 15, who were minimum security prisoners. At this time, the warden drove out there in his big limousine. In the limousine were 5 more brethren, and of course, Warden Harris. They came out there for the full purpose of getting the majority of us to sign this manifesto. All of them signed it that left me. Dad had signed it. I said, we've already had our answer on that. I know that it isn't right. And my father said, well, you know what your patriarchal blessing said "If you will honor and obey your father, you'll never go very far astray." And he said, I'm asking you to sign it. I didn't want to sign it, but I stood there for a few minutes and then said, all right, I'll sign the damn thing, but God knows I won't live up to it. That's when I signed it. The other boys didn't sign it: Louis Kelsch, Maurice Kunz, Arnold Boss, and Charles Sitting. Several days later these 4 brethren were sent out to the barracks, and we 5 men were returned to the old prison for our release next day. As I was about to leave, I shook hands with them and talked to them for a few minutes. The Spirit of the Lord came to me and said, your place is here with these boys. I was chicken. I had a yellow streak up my back that wide. So I didn't. I went back into the old prison, and there were so many there, that there were no barracks, no cells or any place for us to put a bed down to sleep. So they put 3 of us down in the old furnace room right under the administration building. I put in a bad night - kept getting the impression I should not go. But all my folks were coming to get me the next day, and I had no way to get in touch with them. I thought how disappointed they'd be. It was Christmas time and all these things were on my mind as to why I should go out. Well, I went on out. Now, here's something for the record that very few people know. She, pointing to one wife, never had another child. She, pointing to another wife, had a miscarriage and nearly died. Another had a pregnancy of the tube and laid at death's door for almost 24 hours. She had to have one of her tubes taken by operation and nearly lost her ability to reproduce again. I'll tell you, I cried unto the Lord and repented the best I knew how. I knew all the time that I had goofed. I knew that when you sign something, even though you say you won't live up to it, the Lord will see to it that you will keep your word. When the Lord withdraws from you, where are you going to go? Between the devil and the deep blue sea. That's where I was. Well, I went to a meeting and I was called to speak. It was before the group had split. They split after this prison term. While speaking at this meeting, I testified to everybody that I knew I had made a mistake. I knew that I should not have signed that thing. I wished I could repent of it, but I didn't know how. I think I said that if I ever got a chance again I would not sign anything. I voiced it dozens of times. This was 1945. We were arrested exactly 10 years later, 1955, on Halloween Day. I was incarcerated overnight, bond was set up and I was released. I came to see Louis Kelsch, who was out on bond too. He said to me, "Well, Bert, thank the Lord you've got another chance up at bat. Don't fan out this time. Hit a home run." I said to him, as we clasped hands in the patriarchal grip, "With the help of God, I will make a home run. I'll not sign another damn cotton-picking document of any kind. They can take it off right to here." Motioning across his, I never got to see Louis after that. He was incarcerated and I stalled for time. I couldn't get a job anywhere. Everywhere I went, my name and picture had been in the papers. Nearly everybody knew me, at least I thought they did. By the way, being a carpenter and working in the carpenter trade, I was doing very good out at Hoffman Wright Homes. When I was arrested and went back to work the next morning, I asked the foreman there if I still had a job. He said, "No, you don't have a job." So I applied for at least 50 different jobs and was accepted until they found out who I was. Then they said, "Well, it's not that I care, but I don't know what the public will think, and I don't know what the boss will think, or I don't know how this will react to the public." From then on I had an awful hard time to make a living, because when they found out who I was, I'd get fired. I wasn't hypocrite enough to change my name or hide it. Finally I went to selling insurance stock out of town and out of state, and did very well at that. I was waiting for the Supreme Court to hand down a decision. I had just returned home from Arizona and got back the night of February the 25th, 1959. In the morning of the 26th, I picked up the newspaper, and there it was: appeal denied. I was to be incarcerated. My imprisonment was delayed until May the 15th, 1959, exactly 14 years to the date and the hour that I was incarcerated in 1945. On the day of imprisonment, I got the girls in the car with me, and I drove right to prison, turned the car over to them and got in one of the sheriff's cars. They had abolished the 6 months hearing. It was 1 year before we had a hearing before the parole board. About every 6 months I had a representative come out there and tell me that I could get out of there if I would just go along with the boys and sign a parole. I refused, said "No, why am I going to sign anything? I'll take my medicine and I'll die in the damn joint before I'll sign anything." Believe me, sometimes I thought I was going to die. The terms of the parole were like those at my first hearing. It was to live according to all the laws of the state of Utah. It was worded so that I could return to my home to my wife Kate if I would forget all about the other 2 women and the children I had raised with them. That was the way the parole officer put it. You have to do according to what they want you to do, not what you want to do. What they want you to do is to obey the law, and that is the Edmunds-Tucker law, of course, or on Utah law books known as unlawful cohabitation. Right bracket, I can say now that this was the hardest trial I had ever had, and by the same token the greatest privilege I ever had to stand for what I believed to be right. The suffering was immense. My women folks were put through many hardships and were tried very much. Albert was brought into the unique position of experiencing both sides of this intriguing fence. His penitence and his answered prayer carry the weight of honest conviction and a powerful personal testimony. Bishop John H. Coyle and the Dream Mine episode. Another man had a similar experience with a written statement of compromise. It, too, was signed by a man against his personal convictions, but was done because of pressure from his friends. It was the church case against Bishop John H. Coyle of Salem, Utah. John H. Coyle was to become well known as Bishop Coyle of the Dream Mine fame. He was born in 1864. One time, as a young man, he attended a meeting in which the speaker said that anyone who really wanted to know if this gospel were true could pray in faith, and God would reveal it to them. He asked the Lord for a forgiveness of his sins and a testimony of the gospel. That night he had an unusual dream showing him where his cow, which had been missing for several days, was lying near a railroad with its horn bent over. He went to the place and there was the cow just as he had seen it in the dream. This was to be the beginning of many inspiring and revealing dreams that led this man on a most unusual mission for the rest of his life. His gift of dreams was especially noted by his missionary companions while he was on a mission in the southern states. The district president, J. Golden Kimball, was a living testimony to Elder Coyle's dreams of warning and guidance. In August 1894 he was visited by an angel who directed him to a mountain near Salem, Utah. Here he was shown 9 large caverns which had been mined for gold by the Nephites of old. These ancient treasures would be released at the time of world crisis. The honest in heart from all right bracket nations would seek relief from the chaos and distress which would come upon them. This wealth would be the means of both temporally and spiritually saving a multitude of people. Bishop Coyle was shown how he was to labor on this mountain to bring about this great latter-day work. On September 3, 1894, Bishop Coyle began his life's work and mission on that mountain. The work continued with miraculous spiritual and prophetical experiences. Then one morning in January of 1914, Bishop Coyle was visited by 2 messengers having white hair and beards, one somewhat taller than the other. The shorter one did the talking, and for 2 hours Bishop Coyle was told of the conditions prevailing on the earth and the Lord's work which was soon to come to pass. Ere his 2 heavenly visitors departed, they gave him a final warning, in addition to the charge that he must not reveal the hour-and-a-half portion of The Dream Mine Story, Norman C. Pierce, page 21. Although more and more people became convinced of the divine mission of the Dream Mine, many of the general authorities of the church began to oppose it. Articles in the Deseret News and sermons over the pulpit were waged against the mine. Finally, more drastic measures were taken against Bishop Coyle, and on January 7, 1947, he was called before his High Council for a formal trial. A statement was presented which was to result in a repudiation of spiritual claims of the mine or excommunication from the church. He held his membership in the church with the highest regard, yet he had seen in vision the wealth of that ancient mine. He was in his 84th year and was brought out of a sick bed to appear at the trial. Two of his close friends, Quayle Dixon and Wallace Strong, were urging him to sign the statement and submit to the leaders of the church. He was told that if he didn't, that he and many of the stockholders would lose their membership in the church. He was told that the statement would not be published, but would be a means of subsiding the opposition of the church authorities against the mine. In a sickened condition and persuaded by his friends, Bishop Quayle signed the declaration. The next day, it appeared on the front page of the Deseret News. John H. Quayle repudiates all claims regarding Dream Mine. To whom it may concern. By John H. Quayle, do sustain the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as the prophet, seer and revelator of the Lord in this day. I do believe that the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints alone has the right to receive divine guidance for the people of this church as a whole, and am willing to sustain the first presidency of this church as all things, including the stand and instruction with regard to the so-called Dream Mine, of which I am the principal leader. I hereby repudiate all statements which I have made against the advice of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as pertaining to this Dream Mine and my conduct of it, and I hereby repudiate all spiritual claims I have made with respect to the mine. I appeal to all of my followers to join with me in this repudiation of claims to divine guidance in connection with this mine, and to regard this mine as a business venture without any religious significance. I also ask all stockholders in this mine to harmonize their thinking with the published statements of the I ask my followers likewise to retract all statements they have made to the effect that the authorities of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have been mistaken with regard to a mine. I appeal to all stockholders in this mine to rally around the authorities of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and give to them their undivided loyalty, which I now hereby do. I voluntarily do this of my own free will and choice. John H. Quayle, SIG. Witnesses: Quayle Dixon, SIG. Wallace Strong, SIG. State of Utah Wright SS. County of Utah Wright personally appeared before me, a notary public, this 7th day of January, 1947, Quayle Dixon and Wallace Strong, the signers of this instrument, as witnesses, and John B. Quayle, the principal signer of the above. B. L. Isaac, SIG. Notary public, residing at Spanish Fork, Utah. Stockholders asked to take similar stand. Spanish Fork John H. Quayle, head of the so-called Dream Mine or Relief Mine, which is located in the mountains east of here, last night completely repudiated all claims to divine guidance with regard to the mine. He accepted fully and completely the stand of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints regarding the mine, and retracted any and all statements he had made, in which he said that the First Presidency were mistaken concerning this mine. He also called upon all of his followers and stockholders to make similar repudiation and retraction, and asked them to regard this mine as a business venture without any religious significance. Accept statement. He accepted the published statement of the First Presidency concerning the Dream Mine, and asked his followers to harmonize their thinking with the published statements of the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With respect to the Dream Mine, and to honor and sustain the First Presidency is the only ones chosen of the Lord to give divine direction on any subject pertaining to the Church at large. His statement was signed following a formal High Council trial held here last night, presided over by President William J. O'Brien of the Palmyra Stake, and his two councilors, J. Angus Christensen and Wallace H. Gardner. The statement was signed in the presence of the Stake High Council, and was signed by two of Mr. Quayle's followers, as legal witnesses. They are Quayle Dixon and Wallace Strong. The document was then notarized by B. L. Isaac, Notary Public. Because of this exploiting of Bishop Quayle's statement, he then felt the impact of what he had done by signing that declaration. He had signed a statement against the warning of the Nephite messengers 33 years before. He began to endure remorse and sorrow with such agony and suffering that he nearly came to death. In such a state of regret his departed wife came to him in a dream to give him the necessary will to continue with his life and his mission. She concurred that the signing of that document was wrong, and also that they on the other side understood the powers which are brought upon men to compel them to sign these kinds of statements. Bishop Coyle always referred to that incident as the worst thing I ever did in my life. The men responsible for Bishop Coyle's trial did not keep their word. First, they published the document to the public, secondly, they excommunicated Bishop Coyle, and thirdly, they continued to threaten, harass and excommunicate the stockholders of the mine. Thus, from the results of Bishop Coyle's agreement with his enemies, we must conclude that it was not only a worthless document, but also detrimental. Yet, much credit must be given to Bishop Coyle. He later recognized that document for what it really was, and repented of having signed it, in every way he knew how. He suffered extreme remorse for his part in it, and then boldly declared that it was an evil concoction, and useless to God's work. A written pledge may be good or bad. It can bind an individual, a people, or a nation to obedience. Thus, a public document can be a heritage or a shameful experience. The devil must certainly place a great value on signed confessions, oaths and pledges, because he works so intently to persuade men to sign them against their will. The prophet Joseph Smith explained that pure friendship always becomes weakened the very moment you undertake to make it stronger by penal oaths and secrecy. Your humble servant or servants intend from henceforth to disapprobate everything that is not in accordance with the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and is not of a bold, and frank, and upright nature. TPJS, page 146. Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. A man's signature to an oath may bring him shame or honor. One such respected document was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Faced with the death penalty for high treason, courageous men debated long before they picked up the quill pen to sign the parchment that declared the independence of the colonies from the mother country on July 4, 1776. For many hours they had debated in the State House at Philadelphia, with the lower chamber doors locked and a guard posted. According to Jefferson, it was late in the afternoon before the delegates gathered their courage to the sticking point. The talk was about axes, scaffolds, and the gibbet, when suddenly a strong bold voice sounded, "Gibbet. They may stretch our necks on all the gibbets in the land, they may turn every rock into a scaffold, every tree into a gallows, every home into a grave, and yet the words of that parchment can never die. They may pour our blood on 1,000 scaffolds, and yet from every drop that dies the axe a new champion of freedom will spring into birth. The British king may blot out the stars of God from the sky, but he cannot blot out his words written on that parchment there. The works of God may perish. His words never. The words of this declaration will live in the world long after our bones are dust. To the mechanic in his workshop they will speak hope. To the slave in the mines freedom. But to the coward kings, these words will speak in tones of warning they cannot choose but hear. Sign that parchment. Sign, if the next moment the gibbet's rope is about your neck. Sign, if the next minute this hall rings with the clash of falling axes. Sign, by all your hopes in life or death, as men, as husbands, as fathers, brothers, sign your names to the parchment, or be accursed forever. Sign, and not only for yourselves, but for all ages, for that parchment will be the textbook of freedom, the Bible of the rights of man forever. Yes, as I sank into the gloomy shadows of the grave, with my last faint whisper, I would beg you to sign that parchment for the sake of those millions, whose very breath is now hushed in intense expectation, as they look up to you for the awful words. You are free. The unknown speaker fell exhausted into his seat. The delegates, carried away by his enthusiasm, rushed forward. John Hancock scarcely had time to pen his bold signature before the quill was grasped by another. It was done. The delegates turned to express their gratitude to the unknown speaker for his eloquent words. He was not there. Who was this strange man, who seemed to speak with a divine authority, whose solemn words gave courage to the doubters, and sealed the destiny of the new nation? His name is not recorded, none of those present knew him, or if they did, not one acknowledged the acquaintance. How he had entered into the locked and guarded room is not told, nor is there any record of the manner of his departure. Secret Destiny of America. By Manly P. Hall. Many years later Joseph F. Smith became so convinced of this fact that he declared, "When you obtain possession of a principle of truth, let the world shake to pieces, let the heavens fall, and the stars tremble, but stand by that truth and never swerve from it, nor yield from it, living or dead." Supplement to Gospel Problems, page 64. When God inspires men with his sacred and holy truths, he expects them to persevere with courage and patience. The Lord knew that his servants would be hated of all men for his sake, therefore they were counseled to endure to the end. Those who enlist in the service of God must expect the storms of wrath to follow, for there can be no reconciliation between God and Mammon.